The treaty that ended World War I didn't bring peace. It planted the seeds of an even deadlier war. And the world had 21 years to stop it. 21 years of warnings. 21 years of chances. 21 years of watching the fuse burn down. This is the story of how the world sleepwalked into the most catastrophic conflict in human history. Act 1. The Poison Treaty. 030. June 28, 1919. The Palace of Versailles. 5 years to the day after Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. Germany is forced to sign a document that will humiliate an entire nation. The German delegates aren't even allowed to negotiate. They're presented with terms and told to sign, or the war continues. Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. Germany accepts full blame for the war and all the loss and damage that came with it. 132 billion gold marks in reparations. That's roughly $442 billion in today's money. An impossible sum designed to cripple Germany for generations. Their military is reduced to 100,000 men, no tanks, no air force, no submarines, no general staff. The Rhineland, Germany's industrial heartland bordering France, is demilitarized, occupied by Allied forces. Germany loses 13% of its territory. Alsace-Lorraine goes to France. Massive territories go to the newly reformed Poland, cutting East Prussia off from the rest of Germany. The Polish Corridor, the strip of land giving Poland access to the sea, splits Germany in two. The Saar Basin, rich in coal, is placed under League of Nations control for 15 years. All of Germany's overseas colonies are stripped away, divided among the victors. 6 million ethnic Germans now live outside Germany's borders in nations that despise them. But here's what the architects of Versailles didn't see coming. You can't crush a nation of 60 million people, strip them of dignity, bankrupt them, and expect them to accept it peacefully. The treaty isn't designed to create lasting peace. It's designed to punish. And punishment breeds resentment. Resentment breeds extremism, and extremism breeds war. Act 2. The Economic Apocalypse. 230. 4 years after Versailles, Germany is drowning in an economic catastrophe so severe it defies comprehension. Hyperinflation. The word doesn't capture the horror of it. In January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 250 marks. By November, that same loaf cost 200 billion marks. The German mark is worthless. People carry money in wheelbarrows, not to show off wealth, but because you need a wheelbarrow full of bills to buy basic groceries. Workers are paid twice a day because by afternoon, their morning wages are worthless. Wives meet their husbands at factory gates at lunchtime to take the money and spend it immediately before prices rise again. People are burning money to stay warm because it's cheaper than buying firewood with money. Pensions evaporate. Life savings vanish overnight. A middle-class family that had saved for decades to buy a house can now barely afford a loaf of bread with their entire life savings. The social contract is shattered. An entire generation that worked hard, saved responsibly, and played by the rules has been destroyed. Not by their own failures, but by forces beyond their control. And this is crucial to understanding what comes next. When the middle class is destroyed, they don't turn to communism like the working poor. They turn to fascism. They want order, stability, someone strong who promises to restore their dignity and make their nation great again. Families are starving. Children suffer from malnutrition. Suicide rates soar. And Germany blames the Versailles Treaty. They blame the reparations. They blame the Allies. They blame the November criminals, the politicians who signed the armistice in 1918. The Weimar Republic, Germany's democratic government, is associated with humiliation, defeat, and economic catastrophe from its very birth. When people are desperate, when they're humiliated, when they're watching their children go hungry, they don't want nuanced debate. They want someone who promises simple solutions, someone who identifies enemies, someone who promises revenge. Act 3. The world looks away. 445. While Germany spirals into chaos, the rest of the world is distracted. America is roaring through the 1920s. Prohibition, Jazz, the stock market boom. Americans want nothing to do with Europe's problems. Isolationism is the dominant ideology. The Senate rejects joining the League of Nations. America retreats inward. Britain is recovering from a war that killed nearly 1 million of its men. An entire generation decimated. Britain is war-weary, broke, and focused on holding together its massive empire. They've lost their appetite for European entanglements. France is traumatized. The Western Front ran through French territory. French cities were destroyed. French fields are graveyards. France wants security, not more war. They build the Maginot Line, a massive fortification along the German border, believing static defense will prevent another invasion. The League of Nations is created to prevent another war, but it's doomed from the start. The United States, the world's rising superpower, never joins. The League has no army, no enforcement mechanism, no power beyond moral condemnation. Its founding principle is collective security. If one nation is attacked, all members respond. But collective security requires collective will, and that will doesn't exist. September 1931. Japan invades Manchuria, a region of China. It's naked aggression, a clear violation of international law. The League of Nations investigates, issues a report, condemns Japan. They leave the League in 1933 and continue their invasion. Lesson learned: international law means nothing without enforcement. October 1935. Fascist Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, invades Ethiopia, one of the few remaining independent nations in Africa. Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie personally appeals to the League of Nations. He gives a haunting speech. It is us today, it will be you tomorrow. The League condemns Italy, imposes limited economic sanctions. But Britain and France refuse to close the Suez Canal to Italian ships, refuse to embargo oil. The sanctions are toothless. Italy completes its conquest of Ethiopia in 1936 and leaves the League. Lesson reinforced: aggressive nations can invade, and the international community will do nothing. The pattern is clear. The League is irrelevant. International law is dead. The only thing that matters is power, and the democracies have power but lack the will to use it. Act 4, The Rise, 7:15. January 30th, 1933, a date that will haunt history. Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. He's not some unknown figure who surprises everyone. He's been rising for years. His beer hall putsch in 1923 failed, but he used his trial as a platform. He wrote Mein Kampf in prison, laying out his entire ideology. The belief that Germany needs to expand eastward, conquering territory from the Slavic peoples he considers inferior. The destruction of the Treaty of Versailles, revenge against France, the elimination of Jews, whom he blames for Germany's defeat and economic collapse. It's all there, written down, published, available for anyone to read. But the world doesn't take him seriously. He's seen as a temporary phenomenon, a rabble-rouser who will moderate once in power. Hitler has other plans. Within months, he consolidates power. The Reichstag fire in February 1933 gives him the excuse to eliminate political opponents. The Enabling Act in March gives him dictatorial powers. Germany becomes a one-party state. Democracy dies not with a coup, but through legal procedures manipulated by a demagogue. March 1935. Hitler announces Germany is rearming, building an air force, expanding the army beyond the limits set at Versailles. This is a direct, explicit violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Britain and France protest diplomatically, issue statements of concern, and then do nothing. No military response, no serious sanctions, just words. Hitler learns a crucial lesson. The democracies are weak. They won't fight. June 1935. Britain even signs the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, allowing Germany to build a navy up to 35% the size of the Royal Navy. Britain is essentially giving Hitler permission to violate Versailles. They're trying to manage his rearmament, rather than stop it. France is furious but isolated. March 7, 1936. Hitler makes his boldest move yet. German troops march into the Rhineland, the demilitarized zone, the buffer between Germany and France. This is another flagrant violation of Versailles, and it's a bluff. Hitler later admits that if France had resisted militarily, Germany would have been forced to retreat. Not ready for war. But France doesn't resist. The French government is divided. An election is coming. The military advises that mobilization would require calling up reserves, which is politically unpopular. Britain discourages French action. The British government thinks the Rhineland is German territory anyway, so why fight over it? The German troops stay. The Rhineland is remilitarized. Hitler is ecstatic. His gamble paid off. The democracies are paralyzed by fear, division, and war weariness. The balance of power has shifted. France's strategic advantage is gone. Germany can now fortify the Rhineland, making any future French invasion of Germany nearly impossible. Every time Hitler violates Versailles and gets away with it, he grows bolder, and the democracies grow weaker. Act 5. The Dress Rehearsal. 10:30. July 1936. Spain erupts into civil war. General Francisco Franco leads a nationalist uprising against Spain's democratic Republican government. It's not just a Spanish conflict. It becomes an ideological battleground. Democracy versus fascism. A preview of the larger war to come. Hitler and Mussolini see an opportunity. They send troops, planes, tanks, and weapons to support Franco's fascists. The Soviet Union sends aid to the Republicans, but it's limited and comes with strings attached. Stalin is more interested in controlling the Spanish left than actually winning the war. Britain and France declare neutrality. They form a non-intervention committee, which is supposed to prevent foreign involvement. It's a farce. Germany and Italy openly violate the agreement. The committee does nothing. Meanwhile, the Spanish Civil War becomes a testing ground for Nazi military tactics. April 26, 1937, the Basque town of Guernica, it's market day. The town is crowded with civilians. German Condor Legion bombers appear in the sky. They drop bombs for over 2 hours. Incendiary bombs set the town on fire. Fighter planes strafe fleeing civilians. Guernica is obliterated. Hundreds die. The exact number is still debated. But the point isn't the casualties. The point is the tactic. This is deliberate terror bombing of a civilian target, testing what happens when you bomb a city from the air. The Luftwaffe learns. They refine their dive bombing techniques, test their equipment, train their pilots. Germany is preparing for the next war, and they're doing it in full view of the world. The Spanish Civil War ends in 1939 with Franco's victory. Democracy loses. And the democracies stood by and watched it happen. Meanwhile, Joseph Stalin is also watching, and he's learning a crucial lesson. Britain and France will not fight for democracy. They will not fight for their allies. They cannot be trusted. This lesson will have devastating consequences. Act 6, the Axis forms, 1245. The aggressors are finding each other. October 1936. The Rome-Berlin Axis is announced. Hitler and Mussolini formalize their alliance. November 1936. Germany and Japan sign the Anti-Comintern Pact. Officially, it's an agreement to oppose international communism. In reality, it's an alliance of aggressive expansionist powers. November 1937. Italy joins the Anti-Comintern Pact. The Axis is forming. Germany in Europe, Italy in the Mediterranean and Africa, Japan in Asia. 3 aggressive powers, each seeking to overturn the existing international order. Each testing the boundaries. Each learning that aggression pays. Japan has already been waging war in China since 1931. In July 1937, full-scale war breaks out. The Second Sino-Japanese War is brutal beyond imagination. December 1937. The Rape of Nanking. Japanese forces capture the Chinese capital. What follows is 6 weeks of systematic massacre, rape, and destruction. Estimates vary, but between 200,000 and 300,000 Chinese civilians and prisoners of war are killed. Tens of thousands of women are raped. The world is horrified, issues condemnations, and does nothing. Japan continues its conquest. The war in China will rage until 1945, killing tens of millions. The pattern is now unmistakable. Aggressive nations can invade, commit atrocities, and face no consequences beyond words. The next global war isn't a possibility anymore. It's an inevitability. And everyone can see it, except those who refuse to look. Or those who hope that somehow, someway, it can still be avoided. Act 7, Appeasement, 1500. March 12, 1938. German troops cross into Austria. The Anschluss. The annexation. Austria, Hitler's birthplace, is absorbed into Germany. 8 million people, gone overnight, incorporated into the Third Reich. It's another violation of Versailles, which specifically forbade the union of Germany and Austria. Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg had tried to resist. He called for a referendum on Austrian independence. Hitler was furious. He demanded Schuschnigg cancel the referendum and resign. He threatened invasion. Schuschnigg capitulated. The referendum was cancelled. He resigned. German troops marched in anyway, without a shot fired. Hitler returned to Vienna in triumph, the city of his humiliating youth, where he'd lived as a failed artist in poverty, now welcomed him as a conqueror. Many Austrians supported the Anschluss. The idea of a greater Germany appealed to nationalist sentiment. Britain and France protested diplomatically and accepted it. The logic of appeasement was gaining strength. The argument went like this: Hitler is simply uniting ethnic Germans. That's not unreasonable. Besides, Austria was German-speaking. Many Austrians wanted unification. Why fight over it? The problem with this logic is that it ignores Hitler's stated goals. He doesn't just want to unite Germans. He wants to conquer Europe. Mein Kampf laid it out clearly. But the democracies chose to believe Hitler would be satisfied, that each demand was his last. They were wrong. September 1938. The Sudetenland crisis. The Sudetenland is the border region of Czechoslovakia. 3 million ethnic Germans live there. Hitler demands the Sudetenland be given to Germany. He claims the Sudeten Germans are oppressed and must be liberated. Czechoslovakia refuses. They have a strong army, fortifications in the mountains, treaties with France and the Soviet Union. Europe teeters on the brink of war. Britain's Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, is desperate to avoid war. He believes another European war would be catastrophic. He believes Hitler can be reasoned with, that his demands are limited and in some ways justified. Chamberlain flies to Germany, not once, but 3 times. It's unprecedented. A British Prime Minister personally negotiating with Hitler. September 29, 1938, the Munich Conference. Britain, France, Germany, and Italy meet in Munich to decide Czechoslovakia's fate. Czechoslovakia isn't invited to the conference about its own territory. The Soviet Union isn't invited either. The Sudetenland will be given to Germany. In exchange, Hitler promises this is his last territorial demand in Europe. Chamberlain returns to Britain waving a piece of paper, the Munich Agreement. He stands on the steps of 10 Downing Street and declares, "My good friends, for the second time in our history, a British Prime Minister has returned from Germany, bringing peace with honor. I believe it is peace for our time." The crowds cheer. Most of Britain is relieved. War has been averted. But not everyone is celebrating. Winston Churchill, then a backbench MP, gives a scathing speech in Parliament. "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." He's right. Czechoslovakia is betrayed. Their strategic position is destroyed. Within 6 months, Hitler will break his promise. Act 8, the point of no return, 1830. March 15, 1939, 6 months after Munich. German troops invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. The non-German parts, Bohemia and Moravia, become a German protectorate. Slovakia becomes a puppet state. There are no ethnic Germans to liberate here. No justification based on self-determination. This is naked conquest, the annexation of a Slavic nation. Hitler has lied. The Munich Agreement is worthless. His promises mean nothing. Finally, Britain and France realize appeasement has failed. Chamberlain is personally humiliated. He'd staked his reputation on the belief that Hitler could be trusted, that Munich had secured peace. Now the scales fall from his eyes. March 31st, 1939, Britain and France issue a guarantee to Poland. If Germany invades Poland, they will go to war. To tell Hitler no further. But there's a problem. A massive problem. Britain and France cannot defend Poland without help from the Soviet Union. Poland shares a border with the USSR, not with Britain or France. The only way to stop a German invasion of Poland is for the Soviet Union to allow British and French forces through Soviet territory, or for the Soviet Union to attack Germany from the east. Throughout the spring and summer of 1939, Britain and France negotiate with Stalin. But Stalin doesn't trust them, and why should he? They stood by while Hitler rearmed. They appeased him at Munich. They excluded the Soviet Union from that conference. From Stalin's perspective, the Western democracies are trying to turn Hitler eastward, to make the USSR fight Germany, while Britain and France watch safely from the sidelines. Stalin has his own calculations, his own brutal logic. Act 9, The Devil's Bargain, 2015. All summer, the negotiations continue. Britain and France send mid-level diplomats to Moscow. They travel by slow boat. They have limited authority to make decisions. It's a half-hearted effort. Meanwhile, Germany is also negotiating with Stalin, secretly. Hitler needs to avoid a two-front war. The nightmare scenario for Germany in World War I was fighting Russia in the east and France in the west simultaneously. If Hitler is going to invade Poland, he needs to neutralize the Soviet threat. So Germany makes an offer. August 23, 1939. The world wakes up to impossible, shocking news. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, mortal ideological enemies, have signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty. Publicly, they agree not to attack each other. Secretly, they agree to divide Eastern Europe between them. Poland will be split down the middle. The Baltic states will go to the USSR. Parts of Romania will go to the USSR. It's a cynical deal between two dictators carving up nations like pieces on a chessboard. For Hitler, it's a masterstroke. The Soviet threat is neutralized. No two-front war. No Soviet intervention when he invades Poland. For Stalin, it's a calculated risk. He buys time, gains territory, turns Hitler westward, hoping Germany and the Western democracies will exhaust themselves fighting each other. The news sends shockwaves around the world. Communist parties in the West are stunned. They'd spent years denouncing fascism. Now their ideological homeland is allied with Hitler. The democracies realize the nightmare scenario is unfolding. Poland is doomed. The Poles are brave. They'll fight, but they're trapped between two totalitarian giants who've agreed to destroy them. Britain and France are committed to defending Poland. But how? They have no way to actually help. The last days of peace. August 25th. Britain signs a formal treaty of mutual assistance with Poland. A desperate attempt to deter Hitler. It doesn't work. Hitler is convinced Britain and France won't actually fight. They didn't fight for the Rhineland. They didn't fight for Austria. They didn't fight for Czechoslovakia. Why would they fight for Poland? August 31st. Hitler orders the invasion for the next morning. He needs a pretext, a justification. The SS stages a false flag operation. German prisoners dressed in Polish uniforms attack a German radio station at Gleiwitz. They're killed and their bodies are left as evidence of Polish aggression. It's a transparent lie. He just needs a headline. The pieces are all in place. Germany, militarized beyond anything Versailles allowed, led by a dictator bent on conquest, armed with modern tanks, planes, and a new doctrine of warfare called blitzkrieg, lightning war. Italy, seeking to rebuild the Roman Empire, allied with Germany, led by Mussolini, a fascist dictator who dreams of glory. Japan, expanding brutally through Asia, slaughtering millions in China, allied with Germany and Italy through the Anti-Comintern Pact. The Soviet Union, opportunistic, paranoid, led by Stalin, a dictator as ruthless as Hitler, waiting to seize Eastern European territory. Britain and France, the democracies, committed to defending Poland but militarily unprepared, still hoping somehow this can be resolved without war. Poland, brave but doomed. Trapped between two monsters. The United States, isolationist, determined to stay out of European conflicts, unaware that in just over 2 years they'll be dragged in. The League of Nations, irrelevant, powerless, a monument to failed idealism. International law, dead, murdered by years of appeasement and inaction. The world order established at Versailles, collapsing. Act 11, September 1st, 2430. September 1st, 1939, 4:45 a.m. German forces cross into Poland without a declaration of war. The Blitzkrieg begins. German tanks smash through Polish defenses. The panzer divisions move faster than any army has moved in history. The Luftwaffe dominates the skies. Stuka dive bombers scream down on Polish positions, sirens wailing, spreading terror. German forces use a new combined arms doctrine. Tanks, infantry, artillery, and air power coordinated in devastating attacks. Polish forces fight bravely. But they're outnumbered, outgunned, and facing tactics they've never encountered. The Polish cavalry charges German tanks. It's not stupidity. They're trying to break through to retreat routes. But the image becomes a symbol of Poland's hopeless position. Within hours, the Luftwaffe bombs Warsaw, civilian areas, refugees fleeing the city. Britain and France deliver an ultimatum to Germany: withdraw from Poland or face war. Hitler ignores it. At 11 a.m. on September 3, 1939, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain addresses the nation by radio. His voice is heavy with sorrow and defeat. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note, stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently, this country is at war with Germany. France declares war the same day. World War II has begun. But Britain and France don't actually attack Germany. They sit behind the Maginot Line, waiting, hoping somehow the war can still be limited. It's called the phony war, the Sitzkrieg. Meanwhile, Poland is being destroyed. September 17th, the final betrayal. Soviet forces invade Poland from the east. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is executed. Poland is carved up as agreed. The Polish government flees. The army fights on, but is crushed between two totalitarian empires. By October 6th, the last Polish forces surrender. Poland ceases to exist, divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And the world has learned, too late, that appeasement doesn't prevent war. It just delays it while making the aggressor stronger. Act 12, The Real Answer, 27 minutes. So what really started World War II? If you ask historians, you'll get different answers. Some say it started at Versailles, that punishing Germany instead of integrating it into a stable European order made another war inevitable. Some say it started with the Great Depression. That economic catastrophe created the desperation that brought Hitler to power. Some say it started with appeasement, that Britain and France had chances to stop Hitler but chose peace at any price. Some say it started with the failure of collective security, that the League of Nations proved international law is meaningless without enforcement. Some say it started with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, that Stalin's deal with Hitler doomed Poland and made the war unstoppable. But here's the truth. It's all of these things. World War II didn't start on September 1st, 1939. That's just when the shooting started. The war started years earlier. It started with a series of decisions, failures, and betrayals that accumulated until war became inevitable. It started when the Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germany instead of creating a stable peace. The treaty didn't address the root causes of World War I. It just assigned blame and demanded payment. President Woodrow Wilson wanted a peace without victory, a reconciliation. But France and Britain wanted revenge. They got a treaty that bred resentment without creating security. It started when the global economy collapsed in 1929. The Great Depression destroyed the middle class across Europe. It created mass unemployment. And desperate people turned to extremism. Hitler's support came not from Germany's poorest, but from the ruined middle class. Small business owners, shopkeepers, white-collar workers, people who had something to lose and lost it. It started when the League of Nations proved powerless, when Japan invaded Manchuria and faced no consequences, when Italy invaded Ethiopia and the League did nothing. Collective security only works if nations are willing to enforce it. Britain and France weren't willing. They were too war-weary, too afraid, too focused on their own interests. It started when democracies chose appeasement over confrontation. Every time Hitler violated Versailles and wasn't stopped, he grew bolder. The Rhineland in 1936. If France had responded militarily, Hitler would have backed down, but France didn't act. Austria in 1938. If Britain and France had drawn a line, the Anschluss might have been prevented, but they accepted it. Munich in 1938. If Britain and France had stood with Czechoslovakia, they would have fought with Czechoslovakia's strong army and defensive positions. But they abandoned their ally for peace in our time. Each act of appeasement made the next aggression easier. Each capitulation made Hitler more confident and Germany stronger. It started when the international community watched fascism rise and said, maybe it won't be so bad. The Spanish Civil War was a preview. Guernica was a warning. But the democracies chose neutrality. They could have supported the Spanish Republic, stopped fascism there, sent a message to Hitler and Mussolini. Instead, they let fascism win, while telling themselves it was prudent to stay out of other countries' civil wars. It started when Stalin learned he couldn't trust the West. The Munich Conference excluded the Soviet Union. Britain and France showed they would sacrifice their allies to avoid war. Stalin concluded that the democracies wanted Germany and the USSR to destroy each other, so he made his own deal. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact gave him time and territory, and it doomed Poland. Here's what makes World War II's origins so important to understand. It wasn't inevitable at any single point. At every stage, different choices could have led to different outcomes. If Versailles had been more generous, if Germany had been integrated into the post-war order rather than punished, if the global economy hadn't collapsed, if the Depression had been avoided or better managed, if the League of Nations had enforced collective security, if Japan had faced consequences in 1931, if Italy had been stopped in 1935, if France had marched when Germany remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, if Britain and France had stood with Czechoslovakia at Munich, if the democracies had formed an alliance with the Soviet Union before Hitler did, any of these moments could have changed history. But at each point, leaders made the opposite choice. They chose punishment over reconciliation. They chose economic nationalism over cooperation. They chose words over action. They chose hope over preparation. They chose their own short-term political interests over long-term security. And those choices accumulated, like a snowball rolling downhill, gathering mass and momentum until it couldn't be stopped. That's what makes the interwar period so tragic and so important. The war wasn't inevitable. It was chosen, not consciously, not all at once, but through a series of decisions that made war more likely until it became unavoidable. That's how long the world had to prevent World War II. Every step, every choice, every moment of inaction brought it closer. The Treaty of Versailles created the conditions for resentment and extremism. The Great Depression created the desperation that brought extremists to power. Weak international institutions created the vacuum where aggression flourished. Appeasement created the opportunity for dictators to grow strong. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact created the final condition for war. And when the war finally came, it killed 70 to 85 million people. Think about that number. 70 to 85 million human beings. 3% of the world's population. The Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered in an industrial genocide. 27 million dead, more than any other nation. China. Estimates vary, but between 15 and 20 million dead from the Japanese invasion. Germany. Millions dead, their cities reduced to rubble. Poland. 6 million dead. 20% of the population. Entire cities were destroyed. Dresden, Hamburg, Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The war introduced the world to nuclear weapons. Humanity gained the power to destroy itself. All of it could have been prevented. Not easily, but it could have been prevented. That's the haunting lesson of 1918 to 1939. What really started World War II? Not a single event, not one decision, not one person, though Hitler certainly bears enormous responsibility. It was a cascade, a chain reaction of punitive peace, economic catastrophe, political weakness, institutional failure, and moral cowardice. It was leaders choosing the easy path over the right path. It was nations putting narrow interests over collective security. It was people who'd survived one terrible war being so desperate to avoid another that they enabled a worse one. It was the world learning, too late, the hardest lessons in history. You can't punish a nation into permanent submission. Humiliation breeds resentment. Resentment breeds extremism. And extremism breeds war. You can't appease aggression and expect it to stop. Dictators see compromise as weakness. Every concession invites another demand. You can't ignore evil and hope it goes away. Fascism doesn't moderate. Waiting only makes it stronger. You can't have peace without the will to defend it. International law means nothing without enforcement. Treaties are worthless if you're not prepared to back them with force. The road from Versailles to Warsaw was paved with broken treaties, failed diplomacy, abandoned allies, and the triumph of hope over experience. From the war to end all wars to the deadliest war in human history. From November 11th, 1918, when the guns fell silent on the Western Front, to September 1st, 1939, when they roared back to life. The tragedy is that it didn't have to happen. The greater tragedy is that we're still learning these lessons. The warning signs were there. The opportunities to stop it were there. But at every turn, the world chose to look away, to hope, to appease, to delay, until delay was no longer possible.